Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Chinacchio, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. But Dan, the annuals don't count. And also, Dan, it's good to be back on a live show with you. I'm sorry I missed the last one.
Well, I'm sorry you missed it too. It was a great time talking to Ron Friends, but like I said, I'm happy to have you back. Having those rare one-offs where you're not there is okay every now and again, but I miss the heart of this show. And also, a thank you to everybody who is joining us as well, listening in, tuning in on YouTube, wherever you're joining us for the fourth episode of Season 5 of The Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe.
Yeah, Dan, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, more or less, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. So it's the perfect time to start listening.
Yeah, in this season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk, we're going back to the mid-'80s when comics were changing, embracing new visual styles, aging up with their audience, and ditching formulas that had defined serialized superheroes for decades. For Spider-Man, that change came with the beloved run of Roger Stern and John Romita Jr., a short but unforgettable series of comics whose impacts are still felt in today's webbed adventures. And in today's episode, we're donning our best black leather jumpsuits and furry collars as we discuss the kink legend that is Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat.
Oh man, Dan, I just got a visual and I can't get it out of my head now.
I
Yes, the Black
apologize.
Cat has been the Black Cat has been a prominent supporting character in Spider-Man comics for decades and even now has her own beloved solo series. Her character has been notable for many reasons, providing an on-again, off-again love interest for Spider-Man, a thorn in his side, and of course, a sexy bedfellow. We'll be discussing all of those things, but we'll taking a particular look at her role as the co-star of the Spectacular Spider-Man comics in the mid-'80s, which is approximately issues Spectacular number 73 to 100, and how it was this period of comics that launched her to superstardom.
Yeah, well, Mark, the Black Cat, one of the staples of Spider-Man comics, moving forward, on again, off again. But I think in terms of like, when you think about the Spider-Man character, she's one of the like major supporting cast characters that I think most fans know about or have some reverence for. So let's get into it, Mark. We're talking the Black Cat today, a character we've kind of been a bit hands off of, other than some new issue reviews that we've done. We did talk about her creation a little while ago. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about the creation of this character again for those who may have missed or forgotten what we talked about in previous episodes?
Yeah, of course. So back in season 4, when we were talking about the Marv Wolfman and Denny O'Neil runs, we talked about Black Cat's first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 194. Marv Wolfman actually initially created her to be a villain for Spider-Woman, based on the. I'm about to sneeze, Dad. I am so sorry. It is seasonal allergy time here in New York, folks. Uh, so it is based on the. Let me start that sentence again for Rick. um, we've talked about this before, Dan, but Marv Wolfman created Black Cat in Amazing Spider-Man number 194. Well, that was her first appearance. He actually created her prior to that to be a villain in Spider-Woman, and it was based on the Tex Avery cartoon Bad Luck Blackie. However, when his writing duties changed and he was no longer writing Spider-Woman, he decided to bring her over to Amazing Spider-Man, and then also had her redesigned completely by Dave Cockrum, because that's the other thing too. Her initial design, which you could see like in the letters page of 194, she's kind of a I don't know, how would you describe it? Kind of like a period. It's like very period. It's completely different than what we we're used to seeing, what we see now with Black Cat. I mean, wasn't
Completely
it,
different
it wasn't
fashion
even in a
style.
black. Yeah, completely. She looked like a woman from like the 30s or something. um, and then in her initial stories during the Wolfman and then the O'Neill runs, she was kind of portrayed as like a head case. Basically, she was really confused, potentially mentally ill. She kind of had a fixation on her father, and basically trying to get her father out of jail so he wouldn't die there, but rather so she could die at home with his family and stuff like that. So there was like some potential love interest and romance there, but it really, I mean, it was more that she was just kind of a femme fatale, thorn in the side who, and not a lot of depth to the character either. I mean, kind of one dimensional. Um, am I underselling the pre Roger Stern slash Bill Mantlo Black Cat to you, Dan?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there was maybe hints at something more like deep than just kind of like a fascination with Spider-Man going on there. Although I think a lot of the mental illness stuff was kind of retconned away later in a story we're going to talk about in a moment. Or at least kind of like swept under the rug. It is weird to go back and read these, starting issues where she's introduced and see the kind of problematic portrayal of her. Not that Black Cat has avoided problematic portrayals over the years, but like seeing that the basis of her relationship with Spider-Man seemed to be based in some kind of mental illness is
Right.
something that like I'm glad that we've kind of moved past.
Yeah, I mean, weren't there even like some scenes where she was like kind of like his fan club or something? It was weird. It wasn't, it was not. They were not viewed as equals in any sense of the word. It was, she was coming from a position of, like you said, mental illness and just weakness in some way. So, but the character would eventually be elevated with the beginning of this run. And actually, I mean, while we said in the intro we're going to be mainly focused on Spectacular Spider-Man, which is really where the romance and the storyline was further developed and fleshed out. But like none of this would have been possible without a two-parter from Roger Stern and John Romita Jr. in Amazing Spider-Man 226 and 227. And Dan, like shame on me, I completely forgot that we put this up as an essential a couple of years ago when we were doing that series. I'm assuming it was not eventually voted in, huh?
Yeah, I can't remember honestly, which goes to show how long this stuff lingers in our minds. But that episode does exist where things were canonized. You're right. I don't think this one was, but it is a really great story. Obviously, we included it in the essentials list.
Right. I mean, it's a really great story, but like kind of to what I'm about to kind of set up here. I mean, like I think the entire foundation and basis of the relationship that we're going to discuss in Spectacular is not possible without this story. I mean, like, because Stern comes in and, like MJ's out of the picture. Gwen has been deceased for a while. Spider-Man has kind of had these weird failed romances with Deb Whitman and I'm trying to remember was it someone from the school, right? The one of the like oh, I forget
I don't
now,
think
but
he ever had a
point.
romance with. You're thinking about. Oh my god, I'm forgetting her name too. With the fake hair. Um,
Yes,
I don't think they ever had a romance more than they had kind of like a.
there was like a flirtation there, I think. You know what I mean? Like, and I think he like even kind of throws her out there as like, oh, like kind of thinking, like the floating heads of
Marcy.
shame, guilt, and I guess yes, Marcy. The floating heads of shame, guilt, and apparently romance when it comes to Peter. Uh, he kind of puts her out there at one point, but um, this two-parter basically really fleshes out Felicia. They kind of take away, kind of like you say, retcon out the mental illness element. Um, actually, like the story starts with her in in the mental hospital, and she stages a breakout. basically because she's just like getting, she faked her way in there and then gets bored. um, but
She's very
like,
unkind to a one of the nurses there. It's something that I remember
yes,
quite vividly.
yeah, yeah. She puts a nice sign on her that says "I'm a fat slob," which is like, whoa, wouldn't see that today.
No, you would not.
But like one of the things that I feel like Stern and Ramita do here is, they kind of show Felicia with all of her stolen treasures and goods, and like Felicia's basically saying like, yeah, I have a good life here. I got money, I got stuff that I want to have adventure, but something is missing, and that's something she decides on is Spider-Man. Is because she doesn't know who Spider-Man is at this point. But she clearly wants something more out of her life. Like, money alone is not doing it for her, and she feels like, and actually, like, what kind of sets this up is there's this great scene where she's in a laundromat and like some random guy starts to hit on her, and she's like, no, 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 I want something more extraordinary, and she chooses Spider-Man, and basically like goes to him and says, what if I went straight? Um, can we make this work? And how did that work out for Peter, Dan?
Not particularly well. I mean, rightfully so. Peter is skeptical, from the start, and you know, I think he can relate to her, which is kind of interesting in that like he's been miscast as a menace and a criminal, and so I think he wants to give her the benefit of the doubt, but like she, immediately kind of goes wrong, even though she can justify it as like I'm stealing for us or for our
Yeah.
relationship or something, but obviously she crosses that line again.
Yeah, and she's basically stealing from other criminals too, which I think is part of it too. I mean, it's not necessarily Robin Hood. Like she's not stealing from the rich to give to the poor. She's giving to herself, but like yeah, part of her justification is like, look, like there's like this painting that she gets, and he's like, well, how'd you get it? Or how did they get it? She's like, they stole it. Like this is just kind of her world, and she's kind of coming out of it as like, well, I can use these things to give us this life, and I'm a good person inherently, because I'm not a criminal the way those people are. But like, it sets up a great moral conundrum for Peter, of course, because it's like, where, you know, he is someone that is built on the foundation that shades of gray get him into trouble. So
Right.
it's like, how could how does he excuse her, um, and not others, and just because he has feelings for her, and like he also kind of goes back and forth with this idea: is it, am I just attracted to her, or is there something more? But like you get the sense that I think Peter Peter likes the idea of being with someone like her, whether and we could talk about whether that's right or wrong. But you know what I mean? Like it's like he definitely admits like he's attracted to her, and we're the way Felicia is portrayed even here before she becomes like the total cheesecake idol that she becomes down the line in comics. Like we're, she's drawn attractively. She's meant to be attractive. You know what I mean? Like this is not a reach by any stretch. It's not like Peter is not being like, seen her for her heart and soul instead of her person. She doesn't necessarily just have a nice personality, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, he believes in it enough that he even goes to Jean DeWolf to ask for like a amnesty for Felicia.
Yeah.
And that leads to like the really great ending to this issue on the kind of like Doc side where he Spider-Man finally realizes she's not going to change. Webs are up, but she, rather than going quietly, she decides to jump into the water and well, I don't know that she's making a suicidal choice, but at the time it's portrayed that way. And she,
Yes.
appears to have drowned. But, no body means nobody.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
I would say There is no body, right, Wilson Fisk? No.
Yeah, but there's that great, and the art is really like wonderfully done there with like Jean DeWolf shows up at the last minute and she's got amnesty
Yep.
for Felicia, and you've just got this kind of silent, really melodramatic endings of like them standing on the dock and there's really no answer. One of the better endings to a Spider-Man comic of all time, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's such a Spider-Man ending too. I mean, in addition to being so artfully done, it's like, I mean, it really has all of the elements of like the bad luck Spider-Man ending, akin to, the death of Gwen and the death of Uncle Ben, because it's like, Peter webs her up, so and when she goes into the water, and he even says like she won't be able to survive with my webbing on her, it's too strong. So like he feels the guilt and responsibility, and then yeah, to top it off, it's like, and then here comes Jean DeWolf with like the MacGuffin piece of paper that could have possibly had given them both the happy ending they wanted if he didn't just act impulsively. Like, I mean, like for Peter, he didn't think, I guess, that Jean DeWolf was going to come through, and it was like, I can't keep doing this. You have to go back in. Like we can't do this. So it's Peter acting from the moral high ground, and in his mind, he because of that, he killed her. When if he had just waited a little longer, maybe they could have had a happy ending. So like like you said, it's a great ending in a Spider-Man comic. It's also just like that quintessential, wow, Peter just can't win ending.
Yeah,
um
classically fleeting.
and yeah, exactly. And probably not saying that we should have necessarily ended the story here. I mean, like you said, there was no bodies. Clearly, um, the door was wide open for someone to come in and write Felicia. But if the story had ended here, great ending for the character. But of course, it doesn't end there, because then our episode would be ending, Dan, and what else would we have to talk about?
And we're out of topics to talk about with Spider-Man. No, but Bill
Right.
Mantlo, Al Milgrom, and Jim Mooney would bring her back in Spectacular '74, which is one of those issues whose cover you just kind of have to see to believe. This is not related to Black Cat, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's the Deborah Whitman is going insane cover with Spider-Man kind of pulling her face apart. Um,
Yes.
this is one of those issues that's like, I know we haven't done a whole episode on Deb Whitman, but maybe this will be worth revisiting someday. Is like how, like, his identity got kind of leaked to Deb Whitman, who had suspected for a while, and the way to undo it is like Spider-Man kind of tricks her into believing that she's gone insane, and this is the cover for it, and I think it's a particularly brutal issue to one of the female cast members. It's not aged well, but it is
No.
significant in that purpose and for bringing Black Cat back.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, Dan, I mean, we've heard the term gaslighting a
Yeah,
lot this is legitimate gaslighting. This is
yeah.
like Spider-Man gaslights Deb Whitman. Oops. Like you said, not something that probably you would see in comics in 2021, or probably anything after
Well, even
the year
even the cover's
2000, maybe.
text, even the cover's text isn't kind to her. It says, "This is it, the mind-shattering conclusion to the Deb Whitman saga." Yeah, mind-shattering, hers, not yours.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm not trying to yada 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 Deb Whitman, but putting that aside,
Sorry, Deb.
no, I know, right? But of course, this story, it's I believe considered the second installment of the storyline, the Owl Octopus Wars, which we've talked about many moons ago, and we're going to be talking about again. Spoiler alert, down the line here this season. So the Owl Octopus Wars is, I mean, brief synopsis: the the owl and the kingpin, and the mob the mob bosses of the Marvel New York underworld are basically chasing this MacGuffin that Doc Ock is also after. And the difference is, like and it's something that can destroy the entire city. And I always found this funny. Al and them, they just wanted to kind of like blackmail people in power in New York to get, rich and all that. Whereas Otto is like, no, no, I want it because I just want to kill everybody. Because that's Doc Ock for you. He doesn't want power or money. He just wants to kill everyone. um, and Felicia basically returns from the dead or the presumed dead. And of course, in typical Felicia Hardy fashion, is like right in the middle of this. She has possession of the MacGuffin here. And this storyline really sets up. I mean, first of all, I mean, I shouldn't say it sets up the romance. I mean, they become Spider-Man and Black Cat become an item during this storyline, and the way it's set up here, it's actually kind of sweet. Um, because Felicia's in the middle of all this, she gets like gunned down. It's actually kind of, I mean, it's a little absurd. Like she gets like shot by like it seems like there's like 50 Doc Ock henchmen just like shooting at her. It's really bad. And you're kind of like, how the hell did she survive this? But that's the point. She's like on death's doorstep and she's in the hospital. But Spider-Man is just like totally doting on her in the hospital. He's just like completely like just very caring in a way that you've never seen Spider-Man care for somebody. I mean, certainly Spider-Man care for somebody, but even Peter out of costume. I mean, that's kind of always been his MO, is that, he, with Gwen or MJ or whatever, like he could only go so far. And it's like, it's almost like being Spider-Man with Felicia here has kind of liberated him to be the caring partner to somebody that he never was able to be with Gwen or MJ. I mean, is that a reach for you, Dan, or does that make sense?
No, I think that's the appeal of the relationship, is just like exploring, what if someone could fend for themselves, which is interesting because this story basically closes the book on that, and yet we kind of continue down that road. Like as soon as she's reintroduced, right, she is, and as is typical of Spider-Man comics up until this point in the history, the book saves its most brutality for the women in Spider-Man's life. And, I'm looking at the cover to Spectacular Spider-Man 76. And, I might be wrong about this, but can you think of a cover that predates this that has this much kind of like graphic blood on the cover? I mean, it is brutal. He has, like the Pieta holding Gwen in his arms, not Gwen, rather, Felicia, and she's just like
Right, but
bleeding
it's
on the
similar.
ground.
It's similar to what we got on 122, so that's probably why you said Gwen.
Right. Well,
Without the blood though on 122.
yeah. Well, or just like the just frank violence against women in these comics. And I'm not necessarily taking a ton of issue with that because it is a supporting cast member, and this is the theme they're looking to explore. But this book is pretty brutal towards Felicia Hardy in these several issues.
Right, and it's brutal to her, but like again, like you don't quite ever see Peter just kind of go to bat for a woman like this before. There's this great scene, and I think it's at the end of, it's like the penultimate issue of Owl Octopus. And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about Owl Octopus in greater detail. But like Peter is kind of awaiting the arrival of Otto, who's out for Peter's blood after Spider-Man humiliates him earlier in the storyline during a fight. And he's like basically in the hospital room with Felicia, watching the window, and then finally Otto shows up and he kind of just leaps out the window, like ready to just risk it all, because it's like, not only is this like his mortal enemy, but it's like he's just so fired up, based on what Doc Ock and his goons did to Black Cat, that like he's just ready to risk it all for this woman. And like it's kind of astonishing to see, because you just don't see that selflessness from Spider-Man ever for a love interest. Like you just don't. I mean, like that's kind of again been the MO of the character, is that he can't truly give all of himself to somebody else because of the dueling responsibilities of his human self and his superhero self. So this story ends, and you know Spider-Man is of course victorious, and now this is the status quo. It's Spider-Man and Black Cat, and you know to me, I mean, we can talk about. Let me rephrase this. It kind of goes off the rails from here, right, Dan? Like what do you think? I mean, we've joked about this so many times over the past. I'm like, how do we actually have a serious conversation about this now?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to reiterate, like the status quo changes, and they're like a couple officially, even though Felicia is kind of bound to a bed for most of this. She's healing, and they describe it. She's got like all these stitches and tears in her side and things that she can't leave the bed. And yet she does, obviously. But it is funny that like you'd think the appeal of them as a couple would be seeing them adventure together, but we almost never get really much of that at all. She is just immediately confined to a hospital room that she becomes another almost like Aunt May figure, where he's got, well, I've got to go check in on Black Cat because I don't want her to think that I'm ignoring her. And
Right.
like, way to sideline the potential of a relationship in a book than making her like a nag essentially for him. Although I don't think that she's written that way. She's very supportive, and when he shows up in and out of the window, she's very excited to see him. But it is silly, and there are some very silly, aspects to it, which I'm sure we're going to talk about down the line.
Yeah, I mean, but like even once she heals up, or I mean, I don't know if she truly heals up. She basically busts out, and is like, even though she's kind of portrayed as being too weak to do it, she's like, no, 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 I'm good, I'm ready, and let's be partners. And this does set up, I think, one one of my favorite lines from Peter. He's like, or I think she says, "I'll be your sidekick," and he's like, sidekick, like Bucky." It's like, yeah, like Bucky.
Yeah.
It's
So
just,
so going
uh,
back, like
yeah,
as a couple, you know, she's kind of like Spider-Man's first girlfriend, as opposed to like Peter
yes,
Parker's first girlfriend. She is like, I mean, it's that exclusive, and she makes it that clear that that's how she wants it to be.
yes.
We have
Um,
a great quote here from Ron Friends, who said, "She's the bad girl we've all had a go round with." I don't know if that's
I
true for
mean,
me necessarily, or you, Mark.
I don't know if that's true for me either,
I
Dan,
want to
but
know what's
hey,
going
I
on
mean,
with Ron Friends' life,
good for
but
you, Ron.
we should have called. We should have asked him about that when he was on the other week. But the eternal question, other than just is she fit enough to fight crime alongside me, is from Peter is, does he love her as Peter or as Spider-Man, and vice versa? Does she only love him for Spider-Man and want nothing to do with Peter? And I think that's kind of a benchmark for this relationship. Is it's kind of more about the thrill and the adventure of it and the physical attraction than it is any kind of like real relating to each other on any kind of level beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thrill, it's the adventure, and frankly, it's also the fact that, kind of as I alluded to earlier, that, for the first time in his life, Peter, even though she doesn't know that he's Peter, Peter doesn't. have to basically hide being Spider-Man from somebody, you know what I mean? Like it's the opposite. He has to hide being Peter.
Right.
You know, it's like it's this weird reversal of it. But like, you know, I would have to imagine putting myself in the shoes of this fictitious character that's got to be like the most freeing thing in the world for Peter, you know, like he has literally lived, you know, his entire life since he was 15 with this weird, you know, shadow hanging over him, that has completely affected every single interpersonal relationship that he's ever had. Uh, and this is the first time that's all been turned on its head. So yeah, and of course, again, they always keep addressing the attraction element of it, but you know, it's thrills, it's adventure, it's attraction, and it's just that liberation. But like you alluded to too, Dan, Felicia is not necessarily attracted to the person under the mask, which is kind of weird. And then what happens, in fact, when Peter reveals himself to Felicia?
It doesn't go well. She like basically tells him to like put the mask back on immediately, and she kind of freaks out. It's rendered on the page really interestingly. She almost like shrinks into the background, recoiling from him when she sees the face. And the way he's drawn like a Ken doll. Like this is like
Yes.
kind of emotionless face, and it honestly it is like kind of the opposite of the dangerous throw ride that she thought she was with. Like here's this guy like with this nicely parted hair. I don't know. I just think the rendering of it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean it's fun. I mean, you know, the joke has long been, you know, ever since John Romita took over the book, like is Peter too handsome? It's like, you know, like here, like yeah, he's like you said, he's being portrayed as like this handsome Ken doll, and it's like it's horrifying. um, and then I'm trying to remember my sequence here. I think it was before he revealed himself to Felicia, that, you know, just to kind of ex demonstrate just how far this relationship went in terms of Felicia really being interested in Spider-Man here. She introduces Peter to her mother in full costume. And if memory serves, this is like your all-time favorite moment in comics, Dan?
I've brought this up on the show many times before. How absurd I find this to be. She like dolls herself up. She's not even in costume. Her mother comes over to meet Spider Man, like, and it's treated just like it's a normal meeting between any two people. Like the mother is like approving. She's like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy in a costume. Like I'm totally cool with like." Yeah, it's drawn kind of like romance comic-y of them like swinging off into like the night. Like the mother's like, I know you and Felicia will be happy together. It's just so absurd and handled so like nonchalantly. This always makes me laugh every time I revisit this comic. It's just the height of absurdity, and really like Bill Mantlo. Like, what's going on with your relationships, man? Like, I just it's
Well,
such a strange way to present this.
here's the thing to always keep in mind when it comes to Bill Mantlo, and his writing in these comics. This is the guy that created Rocket Raccoon. So, um, and if you've ever read those comics where he was created, I mean, that makes the movie look pretty normal by comparison. So, this was a very creative mind of the era for sure.
I can't think if
And
we
I think
even ever meet Felicia's mother again, ever again. Like, is this the only appearance of this character?
I kind of hope it is because I feel like this is how it needs to be.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean it's so absurd. She like I just go if you haven't seen it, like seek it out or go on our YouTube version of this show and like check out this image. It's so weird. It has to be seen, and I've made it up like a punching bag of mine over the years. But I think it is one of the stranger breaks in tone that this, you can have Spider-Man going into outer space, and I will like probably not bat an eye. But having
Right.
Felicia like doll herself up and introduce Spider-Man to her mother is and get that like a good approval from that is just it's too much too far for me. I can't do it.
I just feel like anytime I've ever talked about this run of comics, Dan, because I got to admit, like, I mean, I'm trying to think more critically about it for the purposes of this episode, but like as a fan, I kind of like these comics. They're kind of quirky and fun, and the Black Cat Spider-Man dynamic is kind of fun and different, especially when you kind of read it in the context of what came before it, in terms of Spider-Man and Peter and his relationships. But I feel like anytime I've ever brought this up in a semi-positive light, you've always been like, until he meets her mother. And it's like, yes, Dad. Yes,
I mean,
Dad.
it's important to note as you say that is like how much this relationship dominated these 20 plus issues of Spectacular. I mean, it really felt like a Spider-Man Black Cat romance book. So many of the pages were dedicated, often quite boring, I think, like to them talking in her hospital room or whatever. And I agree with you. I like this run too. It's an easy thing to beat up on, but I think it actually
Right.
really gave Spectacular like a heart and soul of its own too. Like it had a narrative consistency that allowed it to do something differently than Amazing Spider-Man, which wasn't interested in this story really at all.
Yeah, I mean
And
that's the thing. Like Amazing really didn't touch on it. I mean, like there's even that one Hobgoblin issue from Spectacular that's I think it ties into the second Stern Hobgoblin story. Um, so not the origin, not the first story. This, and not the one before Stern left the book, but that middle one.
like issues
And
241 or whatever.
yeah, yeah, there's a Spectacular issue kind of sandwiched in the middle of that, where we show like the Hobgoblin kind of taking the Goblin Serum and upgrading his powers, and Felicia shows up in there, and it's kind of like, oh right, like she's been in this universe for a while now, but yeah, like even though Stern sets this all up with those two ASM issues in the 220s, like once he presumably kills her, he doesn't really touch it. And in fact, he even brings MJ back at one point. Not as a, I mean, more as kind of like, oh, here's trouble on the horizon for Peter. The old love is back, but like, you really don't see much Felicia in ASM, which is kind of weird. Um, but like, in addition to like the love dynamic and meeting the parents, the other thing that kind of comes up a lot in these issues is this idea of, and I talked about the joke about Bucky earlier, but this joke of like Spider-Man and Black Cat as either partners or her as a sidekick, however you interpret it. And again, like you could talk about whether or not this was truly well executed in these books, and in retrospect, it wasn't. Um, but like this was setting up a completely new dynamic for a Spider-Man comic here. I mean, like we'd kind of seen this in other books. I know like Daredevil and Black Widow had teamed up for a time being. I think that was the Jerry Conway run, on Daredevil. But like, you never really saw. I mean, Spider-Man has always, frankly, been a loner, despite having the main character in Marvel team up. But beyond that, like to have a woman kind of teaming up with him was very foreign, because like women, as we've already talked about with some of these books, have the women in Spider-Man's life have always been treated as like, collateral damage basically. So it was like, oh wow, to kind of treat someone as an equal, a female as an equal to Spider-Man is impressive. But they still kind of just like, old habits die hard. And I feel like in a lot of the early stories, with the two of them together, Felicia's just kind of like doing her thing until she inevitably screws up and almost, kills herself or kills Spider-Man. And then, like, and basically it leads to her having to seek getting powers from the Kingpin, which truly marks like the beginning of the end of the relationship. But like that's, like I said, it's kind of unfortunate that like they couldn't really play with the dynamic that the two of them could work together in a meaningful way, I don't know. What do you think about that, Dan?
No, I think that's accurate. I think, we never get to see this relationship entirely fulfilled, like the promise of it. And when we do see them, like you said, it falls back into these old tropes of like, is she more a hindrance than a help? And I think that's interesting, but it does hang around that for quite a bit of time, and then it kind of just throws her under the bus, where it has her, like you said, seek out the kingpin, and right, you see the relationship end before it even does, because you know that this is going to come to no good, and like her relationship with the kingpin is going to find its way back to Spider-Man and doom their relationship, which it ultimately does, right? Like Spider-Man finds out, and it causes this big rift between them, which is actually drawn as a rift. They're like,
Yeah,
a panel
they're like pushing
separation.
apart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's kind of where, like, I would say, like, the prime relationship between Spider-Man and Black Cat ends, and hasn't been revisited in over 30 years to this level, which is interesting because people really do, you know, classify this as like a top three relationship for Spider-Man. Um, I guess it's not really that surprising in that, like, the other relationship, Gwen, has so passed, and Black Cat does remain a fairly active figure in Spider-Man's life, and we'll talk about some of the times they've kind of picked up and play with it a little bit. But in the meantime, Mark, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about our Slack?
Yeah, sure thing, Dan. Hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Yeah, I'm there all the time. Just this week, we were discussing the announcement of Sinister War. That's the new Amazing Spider Man story that's going to be happening, coinciding with the normal books. Fun. So if you want to discuss that and your feelings about that, why don't you come join our awesome Spider-Man community? Just follow the link in the description and be sure to say hi. And once you're there, be sure to let us know what you thought of this episode you're watching or listening to right now. So, Mark,
Sounds awesome, Dan.
yeah. So, Mark, the thing I think it's important to talk about is this relationship was kind of doomed to fail. Um, I guess I'm curious. We've not really talked that much about Black Cat, but I think it's fair to say that, like, we also aren't rooting for this relationship as a podcast. It's not like our favorite in terms of how it's interpreted in the books, even though we can enjoy the issues where it lasted. Why do we feel like the Spider-Man Black Cat relationship ultimately doesn't work both in the comics and for us, as it seems fated to have not worked?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think first of all, before we even get into like the actual content, I mean, it's worth noting part of the reason it didn't work was this relationship kind of ran up against that editorially weird period in Spider-Man. I mean, this kind of post-dates the full run that we're talking about as the arc of the season, but I mean, it's worth noting that like that kind of like the mid 80s, like there's actually um, there's an issue where Peter David had taken over for Spectacular post Bill Mantlo, where he kind of reunites them, and then like, but by that point, like it's not explored in any of the other books, so it kind of like gets forgotten. And the same thing then happens with Jim Owsley slash Christopher Priest during Spider-Man Wolverine, where at the very end, because that kind of starts off with Peter maybe wanting to get back together with MJ, and you know realizing that he can as Spider-Man, and then it's like he goes back to his apartment, and Felicia's there, but again, then within 3 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, Peter is proposing and getting married to MJ. So again, it's like what? So it just like there was like a lot of conflicting stuff. Obviously, the Christopher Priest era, when we spoke to him at Terrificon in 2018, we asked him about that, and it just seemed like a hell of a time to be on Spider-Man
to say
during
the
that book.
least.
It went beyond just the Hobgoblin. So, so that was part of the reason it was doomed to fail. But structurally, frankly, I think you probably will agree with this, Dan, but maybe others will not. I just feel like the formula ran its course very quickly with the two of them. I mean, like, you kind of break down most of the stories between Spider-Man and Felicia, and it's like, you know, are you gonna go straight? Yeah, but she doesn't, and it's like rinse repeat. Like it's like we keep going on that carousel.
Right. What fun is a
And
black cat character that goes straight?
yeah, I mean, it's just she like she says she will and she doesn't, and then Spider-Man's like, oh well, Lucy, you're gonna hold the football this time, like it's just like, you know um so there's that part of it. I think that got tired very quickly, and then frankly, like the other thing that kind of got tired very quickly was it was very very clear from both ends that like neither character was really attracted to the other under the mask. And while that still had potential for good stories, like I feel like that dynamic is never really explored. I mean, you could say it's kind of explored in Al Octopus, but like in retrospect, now that I'm thinking about what we talked about earlier, I mean, you're right. I mean, most of Al Octopus, she's in a bed, and she's like, it's like she's not the Black Cat. She's just a normal person. So that's probably why the relationship feels the most real there, because it's like the one time in this book where like it actually seems like someone cares about the other under the mask. But all the other times, it's like it's so clear that this is very frivolous and shallow. Um, and you can argue, was Peter did he have a more meaningful relationship with Gwen or MJ at certain points in the book? And maybe he didn't, but like I don't know, like considering the potentials for the storyline for stories here that were not really explored, what was the point then of doing this? So I think that's why, I mean, for me at least, that's why this doesn't work. I feel like no one really took these stories to another level that would make it feel meaningful and real, and it just got repetitive, like the same tropes over and over again with these two characters.
In retrospect, she has an interesting kind of place to play in the love life of Spider-Man, where you've got kind of the like Gwen Stacy who hates Spider-Man but loves Peter, and you've got the Black Cat that is the complete opposite. Not only in terms of like Gwen is kind of a timid damsel in distress character. Black Cat has moments of not being that and being able to fight alongside Spider-Man, but she also loves Spider-Man and not Peter. And then, you could maybe slot MJ dead in the middle between the two of them that embraces all aspects of Spider-Man's personality or Peter's personality and, the roles in their life. So, you kind of build this interesting, spectrum between Gwen and Black Cat, and ultimately you land somewhere in the middle with MJ. And, if that was her function, I think she served that function well. And, once you land on MJ, it's hard to really kind of go back except for kind of like a fling here and there, which ultimately is a lot of how she would be used after that. And also, there's really no coming back from introducing Peter to your mother in a Spider-Man costume. I mean, what? How do you recover from that? That's just the kiss of death.
Or your favorite moment. I mean, however you want to put it.
Yeah,
Kiss of
well,
death, favorite
exactly.
moment.
Yeah.
Um, but let's also talk about, I think, like you alluded to. I mean, whatever we're saying about it now in retrospect, I mean, the fact of the matter is like this relationship and this run of comics. I mean, there's a certain legacy to it. I mean, you can say like whether or not there was truly any staying power to the two of them, but like, I mean, at the very least, I feel like Spider-Man and Black Cat here kind of set the template for Spider-Man with another like superpowered character, and we would see this a couple times in whether it's in this universe or like alternate ones. Like you had Spider-Man and Kitty Pryde in Ultimate, which was I thought that was a lot of fun, that relationship.
Yeah, really
Um,
good. And that's another instance of like he likes her, but it's clear he likes MJ better. And I think the reason that one worked so well for me, I thought, although I think there is some kind of like kind of icky implications of that, but like the interesting thing is like Peter is with Kitty because she's powered, and it's right after MJ almost gets hurt, in a battle, and Kitty is intangible, so it's a really smart setup with Bendis put there, but he clearly loves MJ, but is with Kitty because of her powers, and it's an interesting way of kind of inverting that idea.
yeah, and then I mean some other kind of potential couples. I mean this one they never actually. I think they went on a date. It was Spider-Man and Carol Danvers, but I feel like I mean, I feel like that was one of those like the fans kind of pushed that into happening, at least in terms of a date. Like the fans wanted that to happen for a period, or am I imagining that? Like I feel like there was like a push for that at some point, right?
Yeah, but it never went anywhere. I mean, it was a side
Right.
story. If you weren't reading the B books, you would totally miss it altogether.
Right. And then, I mean, under Dan Slott, we had Spider-Man and Bobby Morse, aka Mockingbird. And then, I mean, kind of a cheat here, but like as I was like thinking of like what were some other like superpowered women that Peter was with, and then I thought of in the volume 2 of Renew Your Vows, like MJ kind of they shared the powers like as the Spider Family, and it was like, okay, that kind of counts. So I'm counting it for the purposes of this podcast.
Yeah, but after this run, I don't think Felicia would ever return to the same glory again, and I think they do some kind of like really strange things with her. Like one of the big ones is that she dates Flash Thompson, which is kind of a fun moment, but also kind of like weirdly antagonistic from a character that I thought was a bit sweeter than that. I think this is where you really get the Black Cat character kind of turning a corner into being, I don't know if vindictive is the right word, but she has kind of like a bad streak to her that we hadn't really seen a ton of up until this point. Like I think the Spectacular run really kind of softened her a lot, and I think her dating Flash is pretty aggressive of her, and poor Flash is just kind of clueless to this whole thing. But these are some fun stories that she's trying to make Peter jealous. In his like relationship with MJ, that she's reappearing back in her life, and Peter, for his credit, I think isn't interested in her at all and doesn't really feel jealous all that much, more than he's like, this is really uncomfortable, and how do I get this out of my life?
Yeah, and I feel MJ is the same. Like she's not too caught up about it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think there's a comment here and there, but it is worth noting. I mean, and this is kind of, bad on Peter that the way that Felicia found out that Peter got married was she got the crap kicked out of her by Venom, like her face smashed up against a wall. I mean, it's actually, I mean, talk about brutality. I mean, that is about as brutal as it gets. That scene from I think it was 316 or 317 of ASM, like this great McFarlane scene. And as like Venom is like walking away from like the shattered wreckage of her body, he's like, "I'll go talk to the wife" or something like that. And she's like, "Wife?" So I mean, that's like good job, Peter. You couldn't have sent her a card. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I guess.
uh, and then she does also show up to kind of help Peter out in Maximum Carnage. Um, again, kind of like, there's this sense of not will they or won't they, because Peter doesn't really seem interested, but I think there's like a brief scene where like MJ's kind of like, "Oh, you're teaming up with Felicia for this, huh?" But yeah, it's like, like you said, like not much followed these stories that, in terms of what they could have gone to. I mean, granted, if they went there, it would have probably felt a little too soap opera-y, but I mean, at the same token, it's like, I mean, she is this former flame that he had this very heavy-duty relationship with, and to kind of get relegated to the background like this is weird.
Yeah,
And also,
she just becomes kind of like a stand-in for the ex-girlfriend. And which is an interesting place to take it, but I don't really know that they know what to do with her in that role altogether.
yeah, and then like, I mean, the big question for me, and and I'm not trying to like get all woke on anybody here, but like, I mean, like after a while, I mean, do we feel like Felicia just kind of becomes problematic? I mean, like, like she starts getting used again more and more. I feel kind of starting in like the Marvel Knights era of Marvel and Spider-Man, like the 2000s when, they started pushing the edginess again. And like frankly, when I think of Felicia, I think of like all of the cheesecake covers by like Terry Dodson and J. Scott Campbell, whether it be on Marvel Knights or on ASM during like the Brand New Day era. I mean, like it's just really in your face, like her sexuality, and like I don't know. What do you think? I'm not trying to like damper anybody here, but like it just seems like the only thing they're trying to sell with Felicia here is sex.
Yeah, I don't want to be a prude about it, but about sex or anything like that. But this is not my ideal, thing, and I think ultimately ends up pushing people away from comics. If I'll be totally honest, like a girl that I was dating in high school saw my comics with Felicia in them, especially the kind of like ultimate Felicia, who was I think even more of a cheesecake from Mark Bagley, and it basically turned her off to comics altogether. And uh, I had a lot of kind of undigging to do
Right.
in that department, and I'm not a big fan of this interpretation of the character, and I would say up until recently it was the predominant interpretation of this character. If you buy any Black Cat merch, chances are you're buying it for the sex appeal of it. And I think it's hurt her character in the long run. But we do get some good stuff every now and again from her. So you know, uh, uh, problematic at least in like how they're selling her with sex, but then you've got the evil that men do storyline, which
Mhm.
like takes that personification of her a step further. You want to tell people about that?
Yeah, so I mean, evil that men do. I mean, we'll have to decide if we want to cover this when we start getting into the 2000s of our run here, Dan. But so this is Kevin Smith and Terry Dodson, and I mean, that cover. I mean, like she's literally falling out of her jumpsuit there. But beyond that, like it's the six-part series. People will know it for the fact that it took Kevin Smith like 5 years to write it. Like they came out with the first three issues on time and then waited 3 years um, to finish it. And where they stopped the series halfway through is actually where Felicia's presumably about to get raped by somebody. But also, it's also worth noting earlier in this series, it's like she's just like trying to make out with Peter like all over the like it's like really like just sexually charged stuff and it's like like I think that's also what makes the whole turn of the series into this like kind of PSA on rape and sexual assault kind of so tonally weird because like they play the first part of like, hey, look, it's Felicia. She's here to, kiss Peter under the mask and, make sexual jokes about him being a Minuteman and blah 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 blah. And then it's like rape is a serious thing and sexual abuse happens to every, 1 in 4 women and blah 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 blah. Which is not saying that like that's wrong or like we shouldn't be addressing these topics in comics, but it's like it's just so tonally dissident with each other that it's like it just like you're kind of like, well, what story are you trying to tell? It also like kind of retcons the character and like her motivations for becoming the Black Cat. I mean, we're talking about this earlier in the show. I mean, first it's kind of like under Marv Wolfman, it's to kind of protect her father, and then it becomes like, to create this life for herself and to kind of find meaning in life. And the way it's written is she actually turns to a life of crime as kind of like um, a backlash against being sexually abused when she was younger. So it's just kind of all over the place in terms of what this, what is driving this character. Not to mention it's like very clumsily and poorly executed. So that creates some problems with the character for sure.
Well, so there you go. That's one to check out. Not.
I get.
I'll be honest.
Well,
I'd
the
actually,
good news is you can read it. You can read it all at once, and it doesn't take like 3 to 4 years to get to the next issue. So there you go.
yeah, I'll be honest. I haven't read it because I've heard these toxic things about it, and I just have no desire to read that story. I'm sure I will someday, but it just everything I've heard about it makes me not want to engage with the content in it. Um,
Right.
so she would be used off and on in various places over the years, but I would say, her star really diminished for quite a while. She showed up here and there in Brand New Day. There was like a Mark Waid Daredevil crossover with the book where, she ended up sleeping with Daredevil, which, there we go again. That if you're talking about that characterization of her, but she was also kind of like an on and off again, like one night stand for Peter. And since she had forgotten his identity because one more day he would leave his mask on, and it was kind of like a guilty, like a guilt free fling that he had.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it didn't develop into anything more, considering that they'd kind of put the genie back in the bottle. But there was that. Then there was kind of like a couple mini series that she got. In '94, she got this Terry Kavanagh, Joey Cavallari, Felicia Hardy is the Black Cat mini, which honestly I've not read. I barely knew it
Yeah.
existed until earlier today.
You're right.
And then I did read in the 2000s there was a Jen Van Meter, Javier Rodriguez Black Cat mini, which I remember being quite fun, if a little bit narratively all over the place. But in my mind, that series kind of started bringing the character back to like what made her great and gave her a bit of a solo spot where she was kind of a thief again and doing kind of like fancy Ocean's 11-esque crimes. And
Hmm.
I think, that series didn't really go anywhere, but, it allowed at least kind of like a resetting of the stage for Felicia.
Definitely. And then, of course, following all that in like more recent history, we kind of had Felicia, the gang leader, that happened following the Superior Spider-Man run. I mean, a lot of people hated the characterization. I personally didn't love it, but it was at least something different and kind of gave her some agency beyond, being everyone's bedfellow. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I guess tip your hat.
I like the new costume at the very least. I'm a bit disappointed that we that costume just disappeared off page. I mean, her regular costume is very like well designed in terms of like that iconic status, but the Humberto Ramos redesign with the cat's eyes on her shoulders, I thought was at least a lot of fun for while it lasted. But I guess maybe it was meant to be relegated to just while she was going evil, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
It's an evil costume, Dan. You can't be good in that costume.
yeah, of course, of course. And then, I think that her star has really kind of grown in recent years. And I think probably because Nick Spencer, say what you will about Nick Spencer's run, but I think he did redeem this character largely in those several issues with the Thieves Guild and having Spider-Man, re-out himself to her, with her kind of admitting the kind of hurt that she felt, knowing that she knew something that had been taken from her. And it gave the character a level of seriousness in Spider-Man's life and has, launched the Black Cat ongoing series, her first ongoing, which I think is one of the best books that Marvel is publishing today. Jed McKay, his writing is just so great for Black Cat. And if the character could stay like that, I would be very happy. She's a really strongly written character in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. Now, and so what are some outside of the comics, Dan? What are some other places where we've found Felicia?
Yeah, well, in the '90s, she showed up in the animated Spider-Man the animated series, and I would say that she had a fairly prominent role there, voiced by Jennifer Hale. Um, in and out of costume, Felicia was like a key member of the supporting cast in that series. John Semper Jr., the showrunner of that show, claims that he's behind the popularity of the character, and I would push back on that. I think maybe he did a lot to bring her to, a mainstream audience, and certainly where I learned about the character when I was a kid. But I hope today that we've shown that this character had a very vibrant role in Spider-Man's life in the 80s. But yeah, in the 90s, I think Felicia, was really kind of highlighted in that animated series as well. She was also originally in the script for Spider-Man 2, the Sam Raimi movie, but she was removed. She was kind of there to kind of play the role of, you know, being the character that drew Spider-Man to being Spider-Man and away from being Peter Parker, as he was kind of like losing his life. And obviously that movie flip-flops between the two roles, where Peter is not Spider-Man anymore, or he's only Spider-Man. And I think they were originally setting it up as like a two-hander, where it was like Mary Jane and Felicia Hardy on opposing sides of Spider-Man's heart. But ultimately, she was scrapped early on and pushed out of the movie. And then she was supposed to be in the Spider-Man 4 movie that never happened, but she wouldn't have been the Black Cat. She would have been the Vulturess, the daughter or granddaughter of the Vulture. And obviously, we never saw that movie, but I know that it was a point of contention, this Vulturess character that kind of saw that movie maybe not exist. And
And weren't they talking Anne Hathaway for that, or am I mixing that up? I
I
thought
think you're
Anne
right.
Hathaway, who of course went on to play Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises. So, she got her chance to be a femme fatale at some point.
In a black cat costume. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then Felicity Jones plays the character in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Of course, she never suits up. And Sony now says they're developing a Black Cat movie, but they've been saying that for like half a decade, so it seems like it's in like development hell. But honestly, I think more than anything, I think it's amazing we haven't gotten the Black Cat in a movie to this point. Like, it just seems like a character that's rife for potential in a Spider-Man movie. I think it's insane that hasn't happened yet. And I wonder if it's due to the rights confusion stuff. We got a very featured role for her in that 2017 Spider-Man game, but she got her own DLC even. But it's amazing that, at least to me, that Black Cat has not made it onto the screen. It seems like a surefire thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say they would probably be struggling with it now with Tom Holland Spider-Man being back in high school. I mean, I know in Ultimate with Bendis they kind of didn't care, but at least I mean, I don't know, from a movie standpoint, I think that's a tough sell. That the teenager would be hooking up potentially with a character like that. But you're right. I agree. I mean, it's kind of like, probably would have worked certainly in the Tobey Maguire, even the Andrew Garfield universe. And yeah, they just never were able to pull the trigger on that. I mean, to have Felicia Hardy in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but not Black Cat. I mean, certainly that's not the only thing that was wrong with that movie. but you could add it to the list. For
I'm
sure,
sure it was
right?
just seeded, right? They were going to do it at some point. And Felicity Jones is a
Right.
great casting choice for that. Beyond her name being so similar to Felicia
Right.
Hardy. But yeah, I don't know. I think this character will at some point be on screen. Whether Sony gets their act together or Marvel asks them to use her in like an upcoming movie, however many movies they get with Tom Holland. But it seems like a sure bet, I would say, except for the fact that it hasn't already happened. So she would be on my top of my list. So coming to the end of this here, Black Cat, like, what do we think of her as a character? Is she just a kind of like Me Too Catwoman, or has she kind of like taken on a life of her own?
I think she's taken on a life of her own. I mean, I don't think she will has or will ever approach the popularity of Catwoman. I mean, frankly, we've gotten Catwoman on TV and in movies multiple times, so that's probably a big reason why we won't. She won't, and we haven't even with Felicia yet. But I think she has her own personality and vibe. And I mean, actually, I kind of find her to be more fun than Selena Kyle. But that's maybe because I'm a Marvel fan. But like, I think the in general, not that this is that the character has been misused, but like, I don't know if the character's always been used to its fullest potential, and that's kind of like my big broad assessment of Felicia. It's like I think there was a lot of fun to be had. I think she's very unique. I think I like the way she is integrated into Spider-Man's universe and kind of what she represents, but I don't think she's always been well used. You?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think like looking back on the character, it's a archetype that really makes sense in the Spider-Man universe. You know, the kind of like dual personality of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and to have a character that only operates on one end of that, I think makes a lot of sense. And I am fond of those spectacular issues, but I do wonder if there was like a larger chapter to be written here. That now that we've moved past it and we got the MJ marriage and stuff, we can't ever really truly explore in the same way, which I think is why I'm pushing for the movies and stuff to do it, because I do think someone will write a really great story with Spider-Man and Black Cat in it that will be like an all-time great story. And I know that you have a lot of fondness for Al Octopus War, and I like that story a lot too. But yeah, I mean, it's funny that Ultimate, decided to not go down that road by making her considerably older than Peter and having it be like used as a joke. But someday, I think we will get like the true potential of this character and her relationship to Spider-Man fulfilled. But until then, I'm loving her solo adventures, and that's good enough for me. So the Black Cat. I guess, would you rank her number 3 on the loves of Peter list?
I think you have to. Certainly longevity alone. But yeah, I don't think I don't I mean, I guess I shouldn't say I don't think that's in doubt, but that's where I would put her for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So, why don't we talk about our Patreon? If you find this show entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Yeah, you can recommend Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah, you can recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, and if you're unable, become a member on Patreon, because that's really how we keep this show going.
Yeah, we can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. And we're constantly making exclusive content for our members. This week, Patreon members will hear Dan and I review Amazing Spider-Man number 64.
Why not take $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content? That way, you'll hear our Patreon exclusive review podcasts on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week they come out, instead of waiting for it to arrive in our public podcast feed months later.
And if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. This season, we'll be mailing out a print of Spider-Man fighting Dr. Octopus as his friends look on, drawn by official Marvel artist Federico Vincentini, and color in inks. Plus, every episode, we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
But we know this is a hard time for everybody, as it is for us too, so we appreciate anyone who supports the show just by listening and sharing. But if you do have the means, please join us on Patreon to support the continued existence of our show. Just follow the link in the description. And again, a thank you to all the members who already make this show possible.
But alas, Dan, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this episode was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friends, Sal Buscema, Ray Sumser, and Nick Cagnetti. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack and Spider Madge. Plus, our introduction animation and musical stinger comes from Josh Sutton from the YouTube show Panels to Pixels.
This was a lot of fun, Dan, but what do we got coming up on our next episode?
Oh boy, Mark. Well, I couldn't be more excited to announce the details of our next episode because it's going to be something a little bit different. Yes, we are doing a .1 episode, truly an episode that doesn't count, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to it because we're going to be exploring some content of this episode a little bit deeper. That's what our .1s are, where there's a topic we want to talk about, but we didn't really feel like it should dominate our discussion on the show, but it shouldn't have been forgotten either. So, Mark, what are we going to be talking about on this .1 episode?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Owl Octopus War, Spectacular Spider-Man number 73 to 79, and marks a major change for the characters of Doc Ock and Black Cat, and is probably the biggest story to occur outside of Amazing Spider-Man, a reflection of Stern's interest to avoid the major villains during his run, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about the Owl Octopus War and this kind of pivotal story in Spider-Man and Black Cat's history, not to mention Dr. Octopus, because it would change that character dramatically, come tune in with us in a couple of weeks. And then after that, we got episode 300, Mark, which I'm very excited about, and I hope everybody's excited to help us celebrate at that point in time. We got something special we're cooking up for everybody.
Awesome.
Well, if you're tuning in live, don't forget, as soon as the show ends, the conversation continues with our audience on YouTube. And if you missed out on Amazing Spider Talk Live this time, we'll be back soon on YouTube. So go there and subscribe and click on that bell to stay on top of all the new live recordings that we'll be doing in the future. But as always, this will remain a podcast first and foremost. And that will always remain consistent, just like how we end the show. And that is with our motto. So, Mark, until you begin bathing in milk surrounded by cats, and I begin questioning your hygiene, what is our motto?
Our motto, of course, is with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk. Meow. Great night.
Too many who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. In 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider Talk, the Amazing